Welcome back to the DJ Sessions, where we feature the best DJs, producers, podcasters, directors, and industry professionals from around the world. I'm your host, Darren, and right now I'm sitting in the virtual studios in Seattle, Washington. And on the other end, coming in halfway around the world from the UK, I got Karan with the Think Breaks Drum and Bass podcast. How's it going today, Karan?
Hey, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing good. You know, I want to say thank you first and foremost for reminding me to get a green screen, which
No problem.
Which I rapidly purchased right before the show today. But you're coming in all the way from the UK, and
That's right.
Your partner Toby was unable to make it, but we'll get him on eventually. Tell us a little bit about the Think Breaks podcast that you two do.
Okay, so we've been running Think Breaks for about 2.5 years now. There used to be 4 of us, but now there's only 2 left. It used to be under a different name called the Basics Podcast, which was part of my friend's record label, Basics Recordings, and he invited me and another friend to do a podcast. We rebranded it to Think Breaks to sort of move away from the label itself. Then we got to Toby Colossus as a guest at first during our first season, which was about 2 years ago now, and we really got on well with him. And then he managed to cover for us in episodes where either I or one of the other hosts couldn't make it. And then by the end of it, we just thought, okay, Colossus needs to be a proper host. So he was very happy to join us. And since then, we've just been moving forward. And now it's just myself and him as our main hosts. But we have a couple of co-hosts that sort of come in here and there during episodes, because we try and do a roundtable format where it's more, we all bring topics we discuss, and then every once in a while we'll get guests on as well. So just to keep it a bit of a varied show, because especially, I mean, now it's a different time, but when we first started, there weren't really any drum and bass talk shows. So we were the first, if you want to say that, or one of the first. Now there's obviously a lot of interview shows. So that's why we have the whole roundtable sort of format, just to differentiate ourselves a bit more.
Absolutely.
I was just going to say, and the name Think Breaks just comes from Lynn Collins' Think About It, the drum break in the middle of Think About It, Think Breaks, and, you know, thinking, having a break, the whole lot.
And was podcasting something that any of you were doing on an individual level before you started this, or was it a kind of all of you got together and said, let's do this as a collaborative effort together?
Sort of. So back in around the end of 2019, the end of 2018, I used to do a show for a YouTube promotion channel, and they usually just upload the latest liquid drum and bass. So I just messaged them saying, do you want like a little show? You know, I'll play my favorite tunes, talk, and sometimes I'll invite guests over to do a mix. And they were happy with it. And I invited a duo called Kinnis. They don't work together anymore under that name. But the two of them make up 2 of the members that ended up being the hosts of the Basics podcast. And when I interviewed them for the show, we noticed that we just got on really well together. We spent some time before the show and also after, just talking away, you know, getting to know each other as friends. And then that's when we just thought, why don't we just try and do a little podcast thing? Just because it'll be a bit of a change of just having mixes considered as podcasts, for example.
I think that's one of the greatest things is, you know, we started the DJ Sessions show just about 13 years ago, 2009. We're coming up on our 12 and a half year anniversary. We got a big kickoff later this year. But I started, you know, the rise of doing what I was doing back with a video camera at 6 years old, back in the 80s. And there was no distribution. I mean, I could play the videotape on my TV, but it wasn't until I got into high school, and our high school had the first ever video production course in the state of Washington. Nice. And obviously I jumped right into that. And luckily enough, right after I graduated from high school, I kind of walked into working on a public access television show. So seeing the technology change from VHS cameras to then setting the way clock forward to maybe basically all the way to 2005, you know, I was in broadcast television producing shows for Fox and NBC. And, you know, when podcasting came out in 2005, we were looking at a broadcast model, and YouTube was just in its infancy.
Yeah.
And we didn't see YouTube being a serious platform in the sense of it was YouTube and a lot of people just talking to the camera. It wasn't
yeah,
broadcast tube or Hulu, and that's what we were waiting for. So we kind of missed this boat on YouTube. Kind of a good move, kind of a bad move. Hindsight, we should have been doing YouTube as well. But podcasting is where we really found our niche with our broadcast television series, and we could distribute, put shows out. They were out there, and I worked for Apple at the time and made some contacts. And our first show got placed when they revamped the iTunes store and made the podcast section. We debuted at number 48 in the podcast section, the video podcast section. This is right when the video iPod had come out. Yep. So we went from 1,000 downloads, 10,000 downloads, 50,000. At one point, we're doing 300,000 downloads a week. And everyone in the video podcast section is kind of running around like a chicken with their head cut off, figuring out how do we monetize this?
Yeah, of course.
Because there was no system in place to monetize. I mean, you could say I have downloads, but there were no Nielsen ratings. There was no way to prove demographics. I mean, you maybe have an email list, but what good was that? And then you're pitching this to people. They're like, well, and they're still stuck in a broadcast television mode, not in a podcast world. So just to see podcasting go from where it has started, even though it was a lot of audio podcasts to then video podcasts, going all the way forward to basically 2020, where, I mean, I could say, we started getting into live streaming in 2009 with our show. And I found that another awesome medium because I could do my live streams, then take them and make them into a podcast right away. And people would still subscribe to shows. But I'm sure you're very familiar with what happened in 2020 with with the boom of live streaming and podcasting. I mean, the numbers almost doubled or tripled with people doing shows, and it's still a very powerful medium to do things with. So I commend you on still keeping your show alive, doing your show, making it happen. I know all the trials and tribulations you possibly could go through, burning out, new host, downtime, upside, financial, all that fun stuff. And so congratulations on doing your podcast with you and your team there.
Thank you.
And I noticed that you also have now moved into doing live streaming as well. Tell us about how that transition happened or how that transition is going.
So before the podcast was audio only, we didn't have any sort of YouTube presence or anything like that. But we noticed that because we have a Discord server, and we usually use Discord to record our podcasts, like we'll just record all our audio. But we realized that we started having a community of music producers that was sort of like, they were still sort of developing their skills, trying to figure out where they stand within the drum and bass scene. And I remember speaking to Toby at the time and saying, why don't we do a feedback session? So people send in their tracks, we feed them back, and that would be done live. And we used to do that on a bi-weekly case every other Friday. That's now monthly. So our next session, at the time of this recording, our next session is next Friday. But we noticed that people were just enjoying like hearing me and Toby talk about tunes, and they get to hear their tracks as well. And we noticed we were having a lot of fun doing the feedback sessions. To actually move the whole podcast, we thought what we usually do with our community is before, when we weren't live streaming, we'd get everyone in a call around Christmas time and we'd all play like Pictionary, things like that, just a nice little Christmas night in if people didn't have like people to go to for Christmas. But the last year that just passed, we decided for our Christmas time that we do a live stream episode for Christmas. So it'll be me, Toby, and another co-host of ours, Terry, who goes by the name Showdown. And the three of us sat down to just talk about Christmas live. And we realized that our chat were having so much fun just listening. During the podcast, sometimes we play like little games and stuff like you would in a game show sort of thing. And we realized that our audience was sort of playing along and sort of chatting to us. And anytime we mentioned a certain topic, so for example, during the Christmas episode, we had a segment where we sort of reflected on the last year. And, everyone started reflecting about their own years and congratulating each other on their successes. And since then, we realized, okay, clearly the live streaming an episode seems to work when your community is close knit. And we were getting burnt out from recording episodes privately. So we thought, okay, let's try and do an episode live without the notion of Christmas, just a normal episode. And people enjoyed it. So since then, we've just thought it's better to do these shows live because it's easier on us because we've got that interaction. And it means that if someone in the audience brings up a really good point, we can highlight that within our show as well, whether it's a roundtable episode or a episode with a guest and they want to ask the guest questions. And I think that's worked out really well so far.
I love the jump of going from pre-recorded. I know what that's like of spending hours behind the computer, of editing, putting the shows. I was talking with somebody yesterday about, I used to do 10-minute interviews in the clubs with the DJs and set up 3 cameras and lighting and gear. So just getting in at 9:00, set up to get a 10-minute interview at midnight. And then I couldn't break down my gear and walk it through the club until 2 a.m. Then I had to get home, sync all the footage, put it all together, edit it all up. And even just hitting that button to render back in the day, Final Cut was locked off. You couldn't do anything. And then you had to encode and then you had to upload. I was spending 3-4 hours for a 10-minute episode. And once we started getting into live streaming, we just invited by the studio, do the interview right there. The questions, like you say, in the chat room, the interaction was there that people could ask. They knew people were coming by. And when it was done, it was live and the link was ready to go.
That's it. And if there needs to be editing, then sure, you can download it and just do a tiny edit here and there.
Yeah,
but the general episode is there.
And I'm glad that you brought that up because I know we were talking pre-show. I'll announce it here. This is the first real announcement, is that we're moving our format to actually a full live interview format. We're not going to do pre-recorded anymore. The episodes will be obviously edited a little bit in post.
Yeah.
But we're super excited to be doing that. I had my first experience using Restream, which we've been using for a while to do our multiple distribution with our live streams. But we're looking forward to moving into that. You mentioned something, though, that when you get together, you kind of catch up on what's been going on over the last year with your team and your crew and everything.
Yep.
What is the most craziest thing that's happened to you over the last year?
For me, it's a tough one because obviously with the pandemic and everything, I've just been working from home and so on with my day job and so on. So for me, life very much just carries forward. I'll do the day job, the 9 to 6, and then if I've got time, I'll do some music or I'll do a little live stream, whether it's Think Breaks or privately as well. So it's a tough one with crazy. I think maybe it's just realizing that, especially with the live streams, that there are people who will literally just take time out of their day to watch you, no matter what I'm doing. Like for Think Breaks, sure, we've got the episodes, the feedback sessions, but sometimes we just host little streams that are just us hanging out with the audience. Because obviously in a feedback session, you're listening to people's tracks, so there's not as much interaction. And with a podcast, I always sometimes find it hard to not ignore the chat because we put the episodes back up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and so on. So if we're constantly referencing a chat that no one can see for the future listeners, I feel like that's alienating. So that's why we decide, why don't we do these little sessions where we can actually talk to our audience? And the fact that we have an audience to talk to is something that I'll never get used to, I think.
Yeah. I remember in my early days of streaming live, the same kind of thing would happen. I'd be giving shout outs or be talking and having conversations a little bit with people that are in the chat room. And I'm like, wait a second. Then I found a way that we could bring IRC in and put the chat room down in bed. This is the early days. This is like 12 years ago. Nowadays you can bring the chat room right in via Twitch and OBS or Streamlabs and all that fun stuff, doing that. But it was just a neat thing. And people could actually see their name in the conversation recorded, embedded into the show. I played with a lot of this technology over the years and found out that I like to keep things kind of, to me, it's now simple, stupid, or what we use the term KISS, keep it simple, stupid.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Hence why I don't have a green screen behind me, but I should, because I'm like, you know what? If somebody's going to come in and attack me for not, or say something because I don't have a green screen in the background, you're not my viewer. You're not somebody.
And it's such a small thing to be annoyed by.
Exactly. Okay. And are they sitting there glued to the screen like this, watching me the whole time?
No, exactly.
No, watching DJ sets like this, all the green screen, the visuals, the effects and everything. been there, done it. And it's like, you know what? If your fans like your stuff, they're going to like your stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of moments, in addition to maybe not craziest things, what's been your most embarrassing moment that you've had during a podcast recording or show?
Okay, this would probably be the Christmas episode. Actually, it's not hugely embarrassing, but so usually during the episodes, I notice that whenever I'm talking, I use my hands a lot. So I'll point to something or do that, so on. And as part of our Christmas episode, what we did was we invited back every guest that we had from that year. So just like a little catch up, like, how's it been since we last spoke to you? And we just finished the last guest, and the last guest was in the chat. And I didn't realize I was muted because I kept myself muted so no one could hear me. I didn't realize that I forgot to unmute, but there I was going on a very emotional speech, doing the whole hands thing, just saying, thank you for coming on and so on. But all people could just see was the whole time. And then the entire chat were just there like, yep, you're muted, you're muted, you're muted. And not the best thing when you're live, where they could just see you're going for it as well with a lovely speech. But that'll probably be it, I think.
Yeah, I've had over the years, I've had what I call the ITV live or the DJ sessions curse, or I should say celebrity curse. I'll have episodes go right as rain. I'll do 100 episodes flawless. And all of a sudden I'll have some A-list celebrity, on site, all geared up for it. This happened with our very first episode with Paul Oakenfold that I ever did. Wow, yeah. This is years ago, actually, back when I was doing ITV. And I just bought some new camera gear, and we had the audio, we had the mics plugged into the board, and then the board went into the cameras. So my audio engineer was listening with his headsets off the board, not what was going into the cameras. And the new cameras had a shotgun mic on them. It was like a boot system. And so they were brand new, and I pushed the boot in and it firmly connected. And I thought that was it. No, the boot had to actually snap into place.
Oh, no.
So what happens is we're in a nightclub. The audio's all loud. I had one of the most awesome. I was just dying to knock this first interview with my first real celebrity. Paul Oakenfold bought his. It was just spot on. And the audio was recording from the built-in camera mic, not the lav mics that we were using. And while I could have salvaged it, because I talk a little bit louder on mic, Paul Oakenfold talks really quiet like this.
Right.
Really
that plus loud music in the background.
Plus loud music going boom, 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 boom. The background. And I got home the next day and I was like, why isn't the audio on this tape? Oh, maybe it recorded on this camera. Maybe it recorded on this camera. And if we would have known to take the headsets and plug them into the camera to find out what the end result was, we would have heard the audio problem. But new gear, mess ups. I've had lights explode on me during, I was interviewing one of the Playboy models one time at a nightclub, and one of the lights just goes and pops right before the interview.
You just can't prepare for things like that.
No, and one time I was interviewing the kid who plays Neville Longbottom from Harry Potter.
Oh yeah,
great interview. And I set my cameras up and I'm doing the interview and I'm looking, and there's all this press and media around us because we were the first ones to go with video. And I'm doing the interview, and over my shoulder, the camera was plugged in, but that camera was on battery and my audio was going into that camera.
Right.
And I'm going like this, and I just see that camera die. I just went, I'm just going to continue on with the interview. And
it's all you can do.
I just played it out and didn't let him know. And after the interview, he's like, that was a really awesome interview. Thank you so much. Like he was impressed with the interview. I was like, but it's never going to air. Never going to do it. So yeah, it's the A-list curse, but now I double check everything, make sure the mute button isn't. That was another thing is having the mute button hit. We were testing audio mics and I left the mute button once for the artist.
It's so easy to leave.
Yeah. You just don't think about it. You're like, okay, you just gotta. But now that doesn't happen too much. We're doing things live. We know the mics are up and running. It's good to go. Now, did you go to school, or do you have a formal education or bachelor's degree for broadcast or podcasting or music in general?
No, not at all. No. I'm a neuroscience graduate, actually. So music and all, it was just when I was a kid, I've always enjoyed music. So I used to play the guitar in school. I used to take lessons, but never anything like formal as such. So music production just became something I felt like doing. I wanted to do. Um, that was about probably 5 years ago now. Since then, it's just been trying to learn how to produce music, run a record label and a podcast. They all just ended up being results of the music. You release something, people like what you do, you just get in touch with other people, and then different opportunities rise up.
And you mentioned you play the guitar. Do you play any other acoustic instruments or anything that?
I play the piano, but again, with both the piano and guitar, I'm so rusty nowadays. I don't have the space on my desk to have a little keyboard to try and play. So I'm definitely a lot rustier now than I was 10 years ago.
What's your are you so you're pretty much, are you saying a software producer then as opposed to hardware or analog?
Mainly software, yeah, because of like where I do all my stuff, like my bedroom. There's never been the space to have proper like big piece of hardware, as much as that would be nice, but I guess in a way that helps you sort of think a bit more creatively with working with what you do have. So yeah, mainly software, but one day hopefully get one good piece of hardware here would be perfect.
What's your DAW choice that you use?
I'm FL Studio. When I was younger, my brother showed me FL Studio. He was just like, why don't you try this for your music? And then I was pretty much sold when it said free lifetime updates for FL. That was like the biggest selling point for me. I just thought that'll be perfect. And then just left it since.
And I'm sure that every producer out there knows exactly what FL stands for. Those who don't know, I'm going to assume this is Fruity Loops, correct?
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
I remember playing around with Fruity Loops 3 when it came out, somewhere around 2000. At least I had version 3 when I was playing. I had it on the laptop. And I was like, this is so awesome. It's a sequencer. It's this, it's that.
That's it. Exactly.
It was fun. I've dabbled a little bit in music production, but love the fact that Fruity Loops is still around. I believe one of our resident DJs, Sergey Andre Cool, definitely uses FL. And it's still just, I mean, I know, like, especially with the internet, people like to say FL's not as good as Ableton or whatever, but they're all myths. So many professionals that do use FL Studio that any sort of argument online is just a moot point, really. Well, it's the same debate between, we get this in video editing. I used to work for Apple and be an Apple certified trainer and one of 300 people in the world that could train people how to use Apple products. And the debate was Final Cut Pro or Adobe Premiere or Sony Vegas out here. And it's like,
yeah,
it's all nonlinear editing software. 99% of what you're going to do is a crossfade, a cut, or a fade in, fade out.
That's it, exactly.
That's all you're really doing. The circle wipes and the star wipes you're not George Lucas. Stop trying to do the motion wipes across. It doesn't matter, color correction tools that you can step up in the suite of things, but really the basic editing of software. Most people could use iMovie, or now it's just called Movie, to do what they want to do because they're shooting with one camera and they just got to cut some footage together.
That's it.
But see those debates happening. Speaking of technology, technology does move pretty fast in DJ land. If you could think of something that's not on the market today, but in your vision would be really amazing to have, what would that be?
For DJing?
For DJing, well, and let's look at it from a production standpoint too, from a podcast standpoint too. But I know you're a DJ, but let's go DJing and then go podcasting.
Okay, that's a really tough question, to be fair, because I mean, I remember I haven't DJ for a long time, and I don't have a proper CDJs. I'm more of a controller kind of guy. That's just what the space allows for. But I do remember being younger and just being blown away at the idea of putting USB sticks in and just doing that, So that's a really tough one. The whole thing with Beatport Link, for example, that's something that I never thought would be possible. The implications, obviously, I know some people would not be up for it, but other people would love it. But just the implications of how how accessible DJing has become. Like, I don't think the only thing I can think of is something that just automates mixing even better. But then again, that takes away what a DJ should do, sort of thing. You know, like, just for example, I mean, before the whole sync button thing, for example, if there's something that makes it even more automated a process, I feel like that's where people might try to go. But whether people like yourself or me would use it, I'm not sure.
I recently just became a DJ of sorts. I play one on live streams. It's kind of an inside joke, funny faux pas thing that, like, I would have to go to do events, and if I didn't have a DJ show up, I would DJ. Or if a DJ wasn't available, I would start having to play the event. And so I started streaming myself and recording myself and putting it out there. And I commend, after years of seeing DJs play, I've been in the nightclub game for 30 years. Going back when it was vinyl and watching DJs play vinyl, I never knew how hard it was. After interviews, now I understand it's hard. Even when it jumped over to CDJs, and then you're right, putting the flash drive in, and where it's going to go into that digital realm of, are we going to start seeing decks that will basically connect to the Wi-Fi, connect to the internet, and then you can just access and maybe buy a tune right there on the go and put it right into your library and be able to play it the way you're feeling.
I think that's how Beatport Link works, though, isn't it?
Is that what it is? Because I'm
believe
looking at it right now. Instantly access a world of music. Try streaming for free. Unlimited playlists, high quality stream it. Personalized library, personally curated playlist. Play offline anywhere. Subscribe, build playlists, go play. There's essential, advanced, and professional. Okay, so yeah, you get the mobile app, the DJ web app. Yeah, so interesting. It seems interesting, and which kind of leads me into my next question here was, and I know we're going to get back to the technology for the podcast side of things, but since we're talking about Beatport, it goes right into one of my questions. Do you expect Beatport to have another serious competitor in the next few years, or do you feel they can really still maintain a monopoly?
I think it still has a monopoly, especially in these days where, while people still do buy music for the sake of DJing, we are obviously seeing a massive shift into streaming, and always will see a massive shift into streaming. I'm sure most people, like, their royalties they get are probably like split massively in favor of streaming, even though streaming pays so little. So Beatport would probably still have a monopoly. If I could wish for anything in the world, it would be that Bandcamp has a monopoly, but we don't get everything we want. But no, I think Beatport is just so well known that a competitor just has far too high of a hill to climb. Just like how it is for Spotify, for example. Spotify is just so globally known that, Tidal and so on come up, and while they are better platforms, as some might say, Spotify already has that hold. So
what would be really awesome that I would love to see in technology advancing is if there was a way that these sites where you can purchase music, use music for DJing, had the ability to also maybe purchase the rights to the master use and sync rights for video on demand. It's just such a huge hang up in the live streaming DJ world right now that it's probably only going to get tighter. It's going to get stricter. It's going to be more constricting as the future goes. And I can talk about that subject in a few moments. You might know about music rights and all that fun stuff. And
to a vague
extent. Most people don't know about music rights, and they want to say that companies like, oh, Amazon should be floating the bill and paying for those rights for music syncing and master use, or Facebook or YouTube should be paying that. They're making so much money. They don't understand how the licensing actually works and who has permission. And sometimes the artists, when they give it away and they give it to a publishing company, they really have no more control over it.
That's it.
And it'd be cool if there was a way to say, oh, you want to use this track, okay, pay 99 cents, but okay, we also have a cut with all the people that own this track too. We're going to give them a cut, and you maybe pay $5 for it or $10 for it, and then you have master use for it for a certain limited amount. You couldn't go use it for commercial purposes, but
I'm pretty sure syncs, even for a limited use, is quite expensive though. I'm pretty sure even small time sync usage is like $99, isn't it?
It
Something like
could
that.
be, we can go down this rabbit hole for a few moments. It basically, when you get the rights, you have to get rights from everyone.
Yes.
And kind of the way it works is, let's say 5 people own the rights. Well, this company says $1, this company says 2, this company says 3, this company says 4, this company says 5. You have to pay everyone $5.
Yes.
And then are you going to get in perpetuity? Are you going to get it forever? And they're going to want to know, what's your audience? How many people is this going for? Where is this going to live? How long it's going to live for? All this stuff. And then they base a dollar sign amount of that. And you have to have the licenses in place before you do it. Because if you go out and make a DJ set and then go, okay, I'm going to publish this, and then you go get the licenses, what if somebody doesn't get back to you? What if somebody says, oh, it'll be $5,000? What if somebody says, no, no, we're not letting you do this?
Then you're back to square one.
Then you're back to square one. And you just recorded this set. So, it'd be really awesome if there's a way that on the whole, the industry could figure out a way to get that master use and sync licensing for video on demand. So podcasters and creators could then make episodes and then put them up. And like maybe it's like a level that says, okay, this is used. You're allowed to have 50,000 views. After 50,000 views, you got to relicense this song, or some general blanket use that says it only goes up to this amount. Like a normal DJ out there streaming live, they might have 1,000 views on their show. Okay, great. But if somebody's out there getting, a 1.5, like I was talking to guys by the name of Party Shirt the other day out of LA. They're doing TikTok videos and they're getting 9 million views on their TikToks. Okay, that's a different category of when you're using music rights for 9 million or in the mid 6-figure views. That's comparable. But when somebody's getting 100 views on their TikTok, or they're getting 100 views on Facebook, or 100 views on Instagram, and they're getting their hands slapped for it, it's like they're actually kind of doing a favor by using that track and putting it out there rather than getting their hands slapped, saying, you're breaking copyright law. You can't. But I know that people have to get protected though too, because what happens when it's 50,000 people using it and they're all getting 100 views?
But I think that's where YouTube and so on work, because, like for example, if you do have music that's already signed to a record label, distributed as well, they end up being tagged, and it's not a copyright strike; it's just a claim. So you don't get slapped on the wrist for that, which I think sort of mitigates the point.
But you don't get to monetize that either.
Okay. That's the thing.
Once that goes in, I think YouTube goes, this video cannot be monetized. Yeah, we'll tag it. And that is the big thing, is that YouTube, being owned by Google, they have Content ID.
Yes.
And they are not sharing that Content ID software program, whatever it is, with other people. So there's another company out there that's kind of does all the tracking. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but everyone else uses this other kind of algorithm from this other company to track. And it'd be neat to get a way out there so that people could start making video on them. I think that would open the gates to a lot of creators not being scared of getting takedowns, notices, flagged accounts. Unfortunately, what just happened in the EU, you may be familiar with this. They just got rid of the safe harbor policy. Oh, well, I guess UK doesn't matter anymore because of Brexit.
Not anymore.
Yeah. So, okay, there you go. But the EU came through and they got rid of the safe harbor in 2019. So now if you're a company and you host video, there used to be a takedown. If you took it down or made a way for them to complain and take it down, the company wouldn't be held liable for that. Now the company's automatically held liable for moment one.
Right.
So you put a video up and it's like, hey, we detected here. We can sue you for doing that. So now they're going to active monitoring, and they're active monitoring your stream. And you've seen this with YouTube and Facebook, and Twitch is implementing it. It's implementing. I keep telling people, watch out for this.
Oh yeah.
Watch out for this.
The takedowns for the VODs.
Watch out for this. Yep. You're going to build your account on Twitch, and then all of a sudden it's going to go, because you're going to get 3 strikes, and they're going to warn you, and you're going to say, so what? I call it the third great whaling. But companies like Mixcloud are there, which is nice. Mixcloud allows you to stream live, but then they'll only take and rip the audio. There's no video on demand. There's no video syncing with audio. Then there's no master use. There's no sync rights. It just goes and they own the license for that, and they do their payouts accordingly. But that's a whole nother subject of copyright and everything I can talk about. And we're here to talk about the Think Breaks podcast. So you mentioned you don't DJ as much anymore. Is that correct?
I never really did DJ.
Never really
much.
did.
It's more hobby DJ.
Okay.
Like I've not played out or anything. I'll DJ live on stream, for example. I did it for Think Breaks last week, for example, which was pretty fun. But yeah, I like it's very much still just most of this music podcast stuff is all very much hobby.
But you do produce,
Yes,
and you do own your label, Detached Audio.
that's right.
Do you only produce and release on Detached Audio, or do you produce and release with other labels as well?
I usually produce and release with other labels. So with Detached Audio, I don't think I've put a track out there in probably 2 years or so on. Just because other people send their music in, and I'd rather they get the spotlight, for example. And I realized that, especially with Detached Audio, I kind of like the whole experimental nature of the label. So what I try and do, and even though I don't have as much time to produce music, is that if I've made like the odd track, the odd single, an EP, I'll send those out to labels. And then if I ever manage to get down to writing a full album, then that's for Detached. So people on other labels can then come back to Detached, see, oh yeah, you could get an album from me here, and you've also got all these other artists to check out as well.
What's the most difficult thing to deal with when you're producing a track?
For me personally, it would be just mixing down the track. Getting an idea down, for me, I find it pretty easy to do. And I've always been the sort of person that's like, I prefer vibes over technicals. I'd rather listen to something that's a 10 out of 10 in vibes as opposed to a 10 out of 10 in technicals. So sometimes my technicals aren't up there, and I recognize that myself because, like, for example, Toby Colossus, who couldn't be here with us, like his tracks have got a much higher level of mix and production, and I can see that just by listening. So I know that I still have a way to go in that regard for just mixing it down. But I realize sometimes, I think this sounds great. I usually produce in the night. So when I have the morning after test, I realize, oh no, I don't know how to mix that down at all. So that's definitely the hardest part of production.
Do you look to the day where you can actually make a living with just your production work, or is it something you're just going to keep this in kind of a side hobby, and it blows up, it blows up. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I'm happy with what you do.
Yeah, for me, it's always going to be a hobby, I think. I'm happy with my day job and so on. And it's nice having a hobby that isn't tied to work, if that makes sense, I as much as obviously making a full living out of music would be amazing. I kind of feel like if I were to have a 9 to 5 that is just making music, my own work would deteriorate in quality, just because there's that pressure of, this is my living, I need to make sure it stands up, as opposed to, oh, I'm doing this thing for fun, let me see what wacky new thing I can do now, sort of idea.
I don't know what that's like, making a living at your hobby that made your hobby a job at all.
It's a tricky one, I think. Obviously for some people it's like, making a living doing what they love is amazing, but I think because of how creatively you have to think about it, I feel like it could, for me personally, I know not everyone who's watching this will agree, that for me personally, I would find it draining.
The hardest thing is when I shifted. Last corporate job I really had was in 2009, and shifted to wanting to do this full time, was coming out of the corporate mindset.
That's it.
Setting myself up to understand that I needed to work this as a 9 to 5 in the sense of things, so I didn't burn out, and I wasn't putting in 16, 17, although sometimes I still do, hour days, depending on the day of the week. But I had to build that pattern up and do that, coaching or mentoring to myself, and making sure I stuck to the ground. And like I said, I burnt out and ups and downs several times of doing that, but eventually started getting the hang of it in the last 4, 5, 6 years, kind of. But it is a interesting switch on the dynamic to go hobby
exactly.
to full-time, or even hobby to business. And you realize, wait a second, I could maybe be doing this as a business, but then you get into it and you're like, oh, now I'm experiencing the burnout, or
Mm,
because that maybe that corporate or that office mentality isn't there, or that check in, check out, punch the time clock for whoever it may be isn't there. So you got to have a lot of self dedication and
that's it. Exactly.
control. And the other things is when you want to relax, like you now have ample time to party because you're
Mm,
your own boss, and you're like, I can take the day off to do that, and I can take the day off to do that, and then things start piling up. I've had that and been backlogged on, like, have 20 interviews in the queue.
yeah.
And I'm like, wait, I got 3 weeks worth of episodes here that I got to publish and get up. It's a balance. It's a work-life balance. It's
Mm,
very interesting. So, totally understand, keeping that in the hobby realm, and not burning out, and that keeps you
that's it.
fresh. It makes
Because I think
sense.
as well, if, for example, if I'm producing music now and I burn out, I can put the music down, come back in a few months. Whereas if music is your living and you burn out, what do you do?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
Exactly. So, switching to kind of the electronic music scene as a whole, do you feel that electronic dance music, I kind of tend to stay away from the term EDM, but do you feel that electronic dance music has become too commercial?
Mm, I'm not sure, to be fair, because I think commercialism has to exist at the same time. So, I think, if you go on the internet, I'm sure there's loads of people who'd be like, oh, this person's music, they're so commercial, they sold out, blah, blah, blah. Right. But I think you do need those artists that are making this commercial music that appeals to like all these festivals and young crowds, because then these are the people that will then dig deeper to find like sounds that are more tailored to them, maybe. you know
Mhm.
um I don't consider myself a big name at all. I'm not. But if someone happens to have discovered drum and bass through I mean, I Netsky, for example, who's doing stadiums and so on, and then they dig deeper and they find me and they really connect with my stuff, then that's purely a result of I found this commercial music. I'm now enjoying this underground stuff.
Mhm.
So I don't know about the idea of too commercialized, but I do think commercial music is important.
Mhm. And I know that the break scene here in Seattle, the drum and bass scene, you know, it isn't as commercial as,
Mm,
the EDM or the house scene has kind of really exploded here. Years ago, it was the trance scene. They've always had a foothold with breaks in drum and bass. But how is that? How do you see the scene there in the UK? Is it still a very prominent kind of genre, or is there one that's more popular than the other? Basically, is it still kind of an underground kind of
I think it
thing?
will always be underground.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as in the more, I think it's almost like there's two different scenes. You have your commercial side, and then obviously you've got the underground side. While obviously they do sort of bleed into each other, uh, I think you do often get the whole elitism of like, they're commercial, they're nothing to do with us sort of thing. But I still think it's still it's prominent, but it's not your main genre here. You can't just walk into any nightclub and expect to hear drum and bass. You'll often hear a lot of stuff in the 128 region, um, which is fine. We used to have more drum and bass in nightclubs, especially with Fabric, which I'm sure you know about the whole thing that happened 6 years ago now. I think it was the drug story.
Oh,
So for anyone listening who doesn't know, there was I think it was two people who died of a drug overdose in Fabric, and they almost shut Fabric down. But obviously there were petitions and so on here to sort of save Fabric. But during the court hearing and so on, there were suggestions that higher BPM music might be the reason people are doing drugs. Very strange, I know. So obviously all of us in drum and bass who operate at 174 are thinking this is a bit ridiculous. But before in Fabric, every Friday was like a drum and bass night. And I think that's not as often now, which is fine. It still means that there is still a dedicated drum and bass night. Yeah, so it's still prominent, but not number one, say.
and doing your show and kind of following the scene, Do you see something that may be an overall trend that is something that is wrong in the DJ scene? Something that just is a stigma that's there that may need to be changed as a whole, that you might hear through conversation over and over again, like, oh, this is a problem, or oh, wish this could change, or anything that you could think of that is something that's really wrong, and how would you go about changing that if there was?
I'm not sure it's something that people think it's really wrong, but the argument about the sync button, I think, is one that just doesn't need to be said anymore. You know what I mean? Like, everyone's always like, oh, only babies use the sync button or something like that. And I think, the sync button is perfectly fine. If you want to use it, use it. If you don't, you don't. So that's one argument that I think people don't really need to focus on as much. Especially, I think with drum bass as well, we do sometimes have what do you call it? I think it's a tough one because I don't want to sound like a cynic or anything like that, but I think, especially in the age of social media, it's very easy to sort of shout out about problems and sort of make mountains out of molehills, so to say. Like, of course, there'll be problems across electronic music as a whole, like, for example, in like diversity and so on. But other issues, for example, like the sync button, doesn't need to be a full-blown argument on the internet, or the idea of, say someone was rude to you in a nightclub or something. That doesn't need to be a massive Twitter call out. So maybe using the whole thing of using social media to promote negative opinions and so on needs to stop a bit. And I think that's more prevalent across all electronic music, or all music in general, to be fair.
Something that I've heard is kind of a little bit of a trend from a number of DJs over the years is the advent of the cell phone in the nightclub. And
yes,
how that has changed with not only being able to take a picture, take a video, and then put that on social media. Whereas back in the day, it was just the photographer who was allowed to do pictures in the club. And then those pictures would obviously be vetted, edited, maybe Photoshop, retouched, and then put online. But now that everyone has the ability to take a picture, and what they'll do is they might catch that picture of the DJ and they might be drinking out of a bottle of water, or they might sneeze, or they might touch their nose, and they capture that picture. And then it goes up and goes, look at so-and-so, they're rubbing their nose. They must've been doing drugs or something weird.
Yeah.
And then it's like, wait a second, somebody was just rubbing their nose because they just had a sniffle or something, and how that has been damaging in a sense to DJ careers, or it can blow up on social media and get 10,000 likes or 5,000 shares or whatever, and a lot of people trying to come back and I've seen a couple events where they basically say no cell phones are allowed into the event.
Yes, of course.
And they want
put your cell phone in a box,
and they also want you to obviously be engaged with the show as well, rather than doing this. Because
exactly,
you're not watching the show when you're doing this. And what are you going to do with that later on? You're going to upload it and go, look where I'm at.
And never watch it again.
Or it's like, okay, and it sounds like junk. It looks like junk because you don't have proper lighting and audio, but that's people's need of wanting to share something. I mean, we drive around and do something in our mobile studio all the time and see people pull out their cell phones. But that's what we want, that desired effect. We want people to pull out their phones and go, what is this truck that sounds like a concert rolling by in front of us, and then share that online. So we're looking for that effect when we do something. But a lot of people, I think, disengage from the shows. And I've heard that kind of trend. That's something wrong. It's not necessarily the DJs themselves that are having the issue with it. It's the crowd. Yeah. And, there was a rumored technology back in the day. Maybe Apple's going to release it or not, but they have an infrared sensor in the front of their phones. And then they put infrared, think of it like infrared lights that shine out. Yes. And when you put your camera up like this and you go to record or take a picture, it won't let you.
Interesting.
So that was
something I'm not sure how much I agree with that, to be fair, because Yeah, I know it's a bit strange for everyone to be on their phones as well. I mean, I don't usually take I'll have my phone for emergency, but I don't
Mhm.
really take a picture and so on. But I think for a lot of people, the one picture or the one video is a sort of a memory of, I went to this night, this was so cool. And then when they come back years later, they'll have that photo and they'll be like, oh, yeah, do you remember that night of when this happened? Sort of thing. So yes, I get the whole thing with the disengagement from the shows, but I think it's more the sentimental value for people. And I don't think we should take that away from them.
Or, could they turn it off and make it so you couldn't record video, but you could still take a photo? Could
Maybe,
they set?
but
Yeah, it's just interesting thing. I think there was a concert. There was a big major concert. I don't want to say Taylor Swift, but somewhere where they weren't allowing cell phones to be out. They come and get you out of the audience. They go, nope, no recording. And boy, I mean, you're not going to take 50,000 people and get all their cell phones, but
yeah,
um, it's just something about that disengagement that you heard from the old schoolers. And then I go back to, we didn't have cell phones in the club. We had the music and we were dancing
that's it.
and maybe networking and trying to talk to the person and dance and hit on the girl or then hit on the guy or hit on whatever, whoever you want to go. You were engaged with the crowd and feeling the crowd
That's it.
rather than just taking that moment or even being a wallflower and just be like, oh, I'm not
Oh,
having
yeah,
fun.
true.
So now I'm doing this,
Yeah.
during a show. And, it's very interesting how technology has changed like that. Something question I want to ask you though is name 3 major things that create inspiration for you.
Phew, Jesus. Okay.
I know, kind of
In
switch,
which
but
regard? In which regard, though?
when it comes to
Production, DJ.
producing music, when it comes to producing music.
Okay. 3 major things. Good question. Good question. Number one would be so nowadays, especially with as we're talking about technology throughout this episode, you now have these sites like Splice, Loop Masters, where you can download samples and so on. Sometimes I'm subscribed to Splice, and sometimes I'll scroll through because there's a mobile app for it. Sometimes I'll scroll through and just listen to a cool sample. That can sometimes just be it. Since it's on my mobile, sometimes when I'm on the train on my way to the office, I'll have my headphones in. I'll just be like, let me just browse through Splice, see what there is, save it for later. And the last track I did was literally just because I found a sample while on the train. So that would be one. Number 2 would be when an artist I really respect puts out a new release, because especially on the less commercial side of things. I know we were talking about commercial being just as important as underground music, but in underground music, there is the freedom to do more things to sort of break out from the norm. Mm-hmm. That in itself can be very inspiring because, you'll hear something and you'll think, oh, I didn't think about doing this before. So that will be number 2. A third motivation. A third thing, I think it would be hearing a DJ play your own track. Because I've got some good DJ friends and some of them live stream as well. And sometimes I'll hear them play my track. And it's like the same thing I was saying earlier about just having a member of your audience just watching you. The idea of just someone else has gone to buy my track and play it on their show. I think it gives you that sort of kick to okay, I need to do another one. Maybe they'll like this one just as much.
Awesome.
Is that 3?
Awesome.
That's 3.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's 3. That's 3. And how do you envision your life being 10 years from now?
10 years
in regards to music production, podcasting.
I wonder if dig breaks will be a thing in 10 years. That would be interesting. So in 10 years, I will be 37, wouldn't I? Yeah, I'll be 37. So I feel like I'd probably do it less because obviously I'm older. I probably have more duties like, my own plays, wife, kids, if that's the way my life goes. So I can imagine that output would be a lot less frequent. But again, because it will be just a hobby, I think I would still have the same satisfaction that I still do now. thing with Think Breaks as well is that the show's been changing a lot over the 3 years we've been doing it. Audio only. We've tried different ideas. Even with our Patreon, we've tried different ideas, see what works, see what doesn't work. So, and especially Toby as well. He's very clued up at what's a trend, for example. So like with YouTube, like especially me and him. So he's in his 30s, I'm in my 20s. We grew up with YouTube, right? Whether it's silly videos, whether it's informative videos, almost every person my age probably watches one video on YouTube a day, I think. I think that's a fair assumption to make. So he's quite clued up on what helps get views on YouTube, what sort of things you can do as good YouTube content. So I feel like he'd still have that and would be able to really think of new ideas for Think Breaks. Mm-hmm. It would be nice if in 10 years I was still live streaming, because I have found a lot of satisfaction out of that. There is something nice about the idea of, just sitting at my desk here, press the live button, and there's people to talk to, and possibly have just a really good time together as well. So more of the same, but just older, maybe wiser. Yeah.
Well, that's older, wiser, and definitely would love to see you still continuing doing what you're doing as a producer and Think Breaks. I'm going to follow up with you, stay in touch with you over the years. Well, maybe I can join one of those roundtable sessions around Christmas
one day,
time.
Yeah.
I know I'm going to be looking forward to being a guest on your show coming up here. It's going to be awesome. To talk about that, the DJ sessions was an original concept. The DJ session that came out of a broadcast television series, just to kind of touch base on what you were saying, where things grow and change and morph, and you never know where things are going. It was actually a show that came out of 12 separate television shows that I had. I was trying to produce them all as a live event. I found out that the easiest portion of the show to produce was the portions where we took a pause and the DJ was just playing during the live stream.
That's it. Yeah.
I came out of that saying, what was the easiest part of doing all that? It was the DJ playing for about an hour or for like 30 minutes or whatever it was, while I was trying to reset the floor and get everything set up. And I said, why don't I produce a show that just features DJs playing? I know everyone in the nightclub scene. Who wouldn't want to be on a show? I got all the camera gear for it. Let's set this up and do it. And, where the DJ sessions is morphed into of having multiple genres of shows, the mobile sessions, the events that we now do, and the silent concert events, and launching it's kind of grown into its own beast, that I left what I was doing there behind and just focused on this brand. So congratulations on taking the first steps of doing the podcast, sticking with it, making it happen, because the journey is open. It's not like the alphabet and you're limited to letters, 26 letters. You have numbers, and you can always go in a different direction and find out what hits, what misses, and something could actually hit. You thought it missed, but it could actually be a hit later on. And you just kept doing it. And somebody picks up and goes, wow, that was really an awesome episode. Then it goes viral, and then people start listening to your backlogs, and people are like, wow, this is really cool. And then they start becoming more followers. It's all awesome. The internet is an awesome place to be. It. Karan, thank you so. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and it's actually just so easy nowadays to do a podcast. I mean, I'm just in my bedroom right now. If for all they want, my neighbors, they could also just start a podcast right now, get it distributed on Spotify within the end of the week. It's so much easier nowadays.
Absolutely. Hey, Karan, is there anything else you want to let our DJ Sessions fans know about before we let you get going back to work out there?
I guess if you the listeners want to check out Think Breaks, you can follow us on Twitch. That's twitch.tv/thinkbreaks. You can find all our links on our website. It's thinkbreaks.com. That is thinkbreaks.com. thinkbreaks. We are usually live on Fridays at 8 p.m. UK time. That's our 8:30 p.m. UK time. That's our general live time. For episodes, that will be on an on and off basis on Sundays. And time is just variable based on whenever we've got our guests or whenever we feel like doing a roundtable episode. Hopefully we'll see you there.
Awesome. Any shout outs you want to give?
my co-host Toby Colossus. It's a shame he couldn't be here, but shouts to Toby. I'm sure you guys will see him soon sometime as well. Shout out to my other 3 co-hosts. So that would be Terry Shodan, Matt Mr. Burnt Yogurt, Simon Millstreet. Shouts to everyone who's watching right now or listening. And shout out to all of our Think Breaks community.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Karan, for coming on the show. We're looking forward to having you on again in the future.
And thank you for having me. Cheers.
You're welcome. Okay. On that note, don't forget to go to our website, thedjsessions.com. Find us on TikTok, find us on Instagram, find us on Twitter, Facebook. We're out there. The website has it all, thedjsessions.com. This is Karan from Think Breaks Podcast, and I'm Darren, coming to you live from the virtual studios in Seattle, Washington. Well, he's all the way over there in the UK. And remember what happens on the DJ sessions. The music never stops.